So the news is out there. The Xbox Series X has been revealed. And I did an initial kind of, just right after it was shown off, a reaction and kind of just recap of what exactly we know so far. There's been a couple more details that have come out since then, but something else I really want to talk about is how what we know now about the Xbox impacts the current state of really just the ongoing debate people always have of PlayStation versus Xbox. We're going to take a look at what we currently know about the PS5, what we know about the Xbox, and how I think it's going to impact what a lot of people are going to be interested in starting next year. So to begin with, let's just do a brief recap of what we know about the Xbox Series X. It is the next generation Xbox console. There is a very heavy focus on the idea of it being both backwards and forwards compatible, so everything that you had on your Xbox One, whether that's games, controllers, headsets, accessories, that's all going to be working with that system, at least that is the goal. And performance-wise, we're hearing the same kind of number that both companies have been throwing around ever since they talked about next gen, which is the idea of 4K 60 as the standard, with potential 8K support for some games, or at least media, and up to 120 frames per second for some games, not necessarily always with that 4K resolution though. The big reveal though, of course, is just how the system looks, which is a more tower-emphasized style system compared to what Xbox has done in the past. They have said that if you want to lay it horizontally, you can, but clearly, based on how the system looks and the fact that the Xbox logo is oriented the way it is, tower is meant to be the default idea. And it looks like it's roughly similar to an Xbox One X as far as height goes when standing up, but it is considerably wider, but maybe a little less deep. So it looks really big, but I think a large part of that is just from the change in design aesthetic, and I'm really curious to see actually how it's going to sit on a shelf. Along with that, we got the reveal of the new controller, which looks to be just a little bit modified as far as button placement and grip design goes. The big differences though is it now makes use of a faceted D-pad like you can see on the Elite controllers rather than a more traditional D-pad design, and it has a share button, which is something I actually neglected to mention in my reaction video. There's now an additional third button on the center of the controller, which is for sharing. So those are some of the main things you know about the Xbox Series X right now, thanks to Microsoft's official reveal. There are a couple other things that people are starting to speculate, which I'm going to talk about a little later, but for now, let's now go switch over to PlayStation and talk about what we know is going on with that system. Now, unlike Xbox, we do not have any kind of official reveal for PlayStation. They have done a couple of interviews and small press announcements that have given us some details. They've talked a little bit of our performance, and part of that is a thing that is very much on par with what we're hearing from Microsoft, this idea of, hey, 4K 60 is the goal, 8K is something that's capable of, it's going to be relying on an SSD, so things are going to be a lot faster. They've talked about those kind of broad performance bits and a little bit about the tech specs themselves, but we still don't have any complete full details, which it's worth noting we don't really have for Xbox either. And again, we don't have an official reveal of the PS5 yet. We don't know what it looks like. A lot of people like showing off that dev kit that's made rounds, where it's that big thick system with the V-shaped vents on top, which is a crazy looking design, and there is some historical precedence for dev kits at least being a partial inspiration for how final systems look, but really what that dev kit looks like I don't think is a perfect example. Even if it's inspired by, the final product is probably going to be considerably different looking. Now, something we do know about PlayStation, at least as far as the goals they have for the system, is some of the things that Mark Cerny has talked about in previous interviews. And this is, I think, where a lot of the interesting battle is going to be between Xbox and PlayStation, is what kind of additional special features they're going to be talking about. Because, for instance, Xbox, again, put focus on this idea of, hey, we're going to have the ability to use xCloud, we're going to make use of ray tracing and variable refresh rates, all this kind of good stuff. PlayStation, so far, in terms of their goals for the system, one interesting thing they've really focused on that Xbox hasn't talked about yet is interface. In particular, there's been this heavy idea of making sure the user interface for the PlayStation is something that is not only simple and user-friendly like we're seeing currently on the PS4, but at the same time helps to also inform players more about the game they're about to play, so they don't have to worry about things like, say, starting the game up. An idea being that, hey, I might play Call of Duty if my friends are on right now, and instead of having to log into the game and see what matches they're in and what kind of stuff's going on, you can actually see right there from your home base not only who's playing, which is kind of normally available, but all that in-depth info as well. And that's really it that we know for these systems, aside from the fact that they are both coming out holiday 2020, which could still give a little variance. That could be as early as late October, that could be as late as mid-December. More than likely, both systems will be targeted at November. That has been the kind of tradition for a lot of big system launches. That is when the original PS4 and Xbox One came out, so they're likely to repeat that. But other than that, there are a lot of unknowns we still don't know. We don't know the pricing on them. Again, we don't know what the PS5 itself is going to look like. And I think most importantly, there's the kind of hanging question of the idea of multiple models. One of the big talking points that's been going on a lot with Xbox is the fact that along with Project Scarlet, which is the new system coming out now known as Series X, there was also talk of Project Lockhart. And it's this idea that alongside the Series X, Microsoft could also release a cheaper, more affordable system. The idea being that, like, yeah, Series X is expensive, it's a new system, it costs $500, potentially $600 to pick up, but if you don't want to spend that much, if you don't care about 4K, if you don't care about discs, here is the smaller, cheaper, more affordable option that's still going to play all the same games called the Series S. Something smaller, more cheaper, more affordable. On the other hand, with PlayStation, most of the talking right now has been focused on there just being one singular PS5. Historically, PlayStation has messed with multiple models at launch before, but usually the big difference is hard drive size, maybe additional ports. The most significant one really was with the PS3, where you could get a 20 gig model or a 60 gig model that not only had more ports, but most importantly, actually had Wi-Fi support, and you had to rely on hardline for 20, which was annoying. And I think that's a really important thing to kind of specify and figure out right now, because sure, if we're just talking about a head-to-head battle between Xbox and PlayStation 5, both having $500, $600 expensive systems, which one are you going to get? That's a fairly direct head-on fight that is going to be heavily based on just what people kind of have console loyalty to. I mean, if there's a game you really like that's going to only be on one system, that kind of makes your decision for you. But if the debate instead is PS5 versus $600 Xbox, $300 Xbox, that messes with things a lot because people like things that are affordable. And the reason why this happened, I think, comes down to two main things for Xbox. One, there was the initial kind of botched launch of the Xbox One, the forced bundling with Kinect, some of the performance differences between the Xbox One and the PS4 base models, where the PS4 was the stronger of the two. The Xbox One was more expensive because it had the Kinect that you had to get with it. It was just a lot of problems, and a lot of people honestly weren't for it, especially with the whole confusion over how digital game distribution was going to be handled at the time. The other issue, which has been the longer-term problem, is exclusives. And so when you talk about these being the two main issues that Microsoft had going against the PS4, when you look at it going into a next generation, as far as the launch issues go, it's a fresh start, it's a new generation, it's time to do things differently, and I think a lot of the goodwill Microsoft has been growing over the last couple of years is going to help with that, between things like how they now approach digital game sales, how they now have things like xCloud and Game Pass. There is a lot going on that people really like the idea of. And so the bigger question then is exclusives, which is something that Microsoft, I think, is heavily trying to address right now, because as of the Game Awards last night, we now know of 2 Xbox Series X game releases a full year in advance. The point is, I think Microsoft is really heavily trying to set this tone of, hey, yes, we're going to have exclusives and they're going to be available at launch for the system. One of the really big things they made a big deal out of a couple years back at E3 was the fact that they acquired a bunch of companies. I think right now Microsoft is saying they have a total of 15 game companies under them. And the thing about making that a big announcement at E3 a couple years ago is, if these are recent acquires and they are working on games, none of those games were going to come out in time for the Xbox One. Obviously, it was a move in the long run to prep things for Series X. And so it makes me really wonder, exactly how many exclusives do they plan to have, at least in terms of how exclusives work on Xbox? Yes, they'll be on PC as well, but in terms of the PS4 versus Xbox argument, what's the actual game breakup going to be at launch? But you know, something else worth considering too is the way gaming systems are working now and the way they build on top of each other. There's also this kind of hanging question of, even if there was an amazing game on the other system, if your goal is to stick with one single system, you never want to invest in having both, with the fact that backwards compatibility is such a heavy focus, would people even want to switch over at this point? Let's say you're a long-term PlayStation fan. You've built up your library of your favorite PS4 exclusives, you've seen the PS5, you want to grab it, you want to upgrade, and you're happy that all the PS4 games you're ever going to run on that. On the other hand, if you look at the Xbox and you still want to stick with your one console, that invalidates that whole library you built up for PS4. It means nothing at that point, because unless you hold on to your PS4 or get a PS5, you can't play those. And so by having this kind of momentum of bringing all the current generation into the next one, it makes a really strong argument for people to stick with the sides they've already picked, or force them to go to that route of getting both. Honestly, the main reason I wanted to do this video is to really just kind of get all these thoughts out right now, because it's honestly astounding that we got a reveal this early for the Series X. It's unprecedented to find out and see the system this far in advance. Sure, knowing that it's coming, knowing that it exists, and maybe having a project name, but normally seeing the actual system, that's not until usually a few months before. Normally at E3, sometimes at specialized events. And so with this much time to go until these systems come out, I'm really curious how this kind of early start in the race is going to affect what people are interested in. So let me know in the comments down below. What do you guys think of the Series X reveal? Does this change your mind about systems? Are you interested in it? Do you not care? Are you still waiting for PS5 for more info? There's a lot going on, so let me know.